October 14, 2009, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. I remember the exact moment I stopped being arrogant. It wasn't during a firefight. It wasn't when a rocket-propelled grenade skipped off the hardpan 50 meters in front of our vehicle. It wasn't even during the 12 days I once went without more than 2 hours of sleep. It was at 4:30 hours on a cold Afghan morning, somewhere in the dust and dark of Kandahar Province, when a British SAS trooper, who couldn't have weighed more than 175 pounds soaking wet, looked at me after a full night patrol with a 35-kilometer foot movement behind us, and said calmly, without a trace of fatigue in his voice, "Right then. Again." And I, a Green Beret, a United States Army Special Forces sergeant, a man who had passed the Q course, survived Robin Sage, deployed twice to Afghanistan, I had to look away because I genuinely did not know if my legs would carry me one more mile. That's the story I'm going to tell you today. You have to understand who I was before that moment so you can understand what it meant. By October 2009, I had been in the U.S. Army for 9 years. I was assigned to the 3rd Special Forces Group out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the group historically oriented towards sub-Saharan Africa, but heavily rotated into Afghanistan after September 11th. I was a weapons sergeant in 18 Bravo on an operational detachment Alpha, what we call an ODA, 12 men, the sharpest knife in the Army's drawer as far as I was concerned. The Q course, the Special Forces Qualification course, had taken me over a year and a half to complete. It nearly broke me twice. The land navigation portions alone could destroy a man's confidence. Then Robin Sage, the final exercise, dropped us into a fictional guerrilla war in the woods of North Carolina where we had to train, lead, and fight alongside role-playing insurgents. Every decision was tested. Every relationship was tested. Your language skills, your medical knowledge, your ability to stay human under pressure, all of it. I graduated, I earned the beret, and I wore it with the quiet, certain pride of a man who believes he's been through the worst the world can throw at him. I was wrong. The Green Berets, you should know, trace their lineage all the way back to the Second World War, specifically to the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, and the Jedburgh teams that parachuted behind enemy lines in occupied Europe to train local resistance fighters against Nazi forces. That legacy of working with people, not just against enemies, is what separates us. We are not just fighters. We are teachers, diplomats, and strategists embedded in foreign cultures, often alone, often without conventional backup. By 2009, I had internalized all of that. I was good at my job, I knew it. What I didn't know was what was waiting for me at a joint coalition forward operating base in Kandahar Province, in the form of a 4-man SAS patrol element that had just arrived for a combined training and operational exchange. The SAS, the Special Air Service, 22 Regiment, is an institution that defies easy description. Founded during the Second World War in 1941 by a Scottish officer named David Stirling, the unit was built from the ground up as a commando force to operate deep behind enemy lines in the North African campaign against German and Italian forces. Stirling's idea was radical for its time. Small groups of highly skilled men who could infiltrate, destroy, and vanish, striking airfields, supply lines, and communication hubs across the desert. In its first year of operation, the original SAS destroyed more enemy aircraft on the ground than the Royal Air Force shot down in the air. That DNA, quiet, efficient, devastating, never left the regiment. By 2009, 2 full SAS squadrons had been operating in and out of Afghanistan since 2001, initially deployed to dismantle al-Qaeda networks after the September 11th attacks and to run Operation Trent, the largest single SAS operation in its history, including its first wartime Halo parachute insertion. These were not desk soldiers. These were men who had been in the fight for 8 years without interruption. When 4 of them arrived at our FOB, I expected some version of what I knew: serious men, capable operators, maybe a little standoffish. The British military relationship with American Special Forces is genuinely close. Green Berets from the 5th Special Forces Group had trained alongside British soldiers at Brecon in Wales. Exchange programs existed. There was mutual respect, at least on paper. What I didn't expect was how ordinary they seemed. They were not large men. They did not walk around with the performative intensity I had seen in some other elite units. They wore no rank insignia, the SAS strips that away. They introduced themselves by first names only. One of them, I'll call him Callum, looked like he could be a school teacher back home in England, slight build, pale, sandy-haired. He shook my hand and asked me about our ODA's area of operations with the relaxed curiosity of a man planning a hiking trip. I made the mistake of relaxing. The exchange was structured around 3 core phases: movement and navigation under load, close quarters battle drills, and a final combined patrol into a Taliban-adjacent area of Kandahar Province. The British element would push us. We would push them back. That was the theory. The first morning, we moved out before sunrise. A 30-kilometer route march through terrain that looked flat on the map and felt like the surface of Mars on foot. The ground in Kandahar shifts between ankle-deep dust and fist-sized rocks that turn in every direction without warning. The temperature at that hour was around 5 degrees Celsius. By noon, it would climb past 30. Each man carried a burgan, the British term for a loaded rucksack, and full fighting kit. Weapon, body armor, water, medical gear, communications, ammunition. The load came to somewhere north of 65 pounds. I was fit, I want to be clear about that. I ran, I lifted. I had spent months on deployment moving through terrain like this. I believed, genuinely, that I was in the top fraction of 1% of human physical conditioning. Within 2 hours, I was hurting. The SAS moves differently. This is the thing that no one tells you. It is not that they are faster necessarily. It is that they never stop. American special operations culture at its best is aggressive, adaptive, intense, but it also contains moments of consolidation, a brief halt, a water break, a moment to recheck the map. The SAS treats those moments as optional, and on that first march they were not offered. Callum navigated. He carried a rifle and a compass and moved across that terrain with a fluency that was almost offensive. No fumbling, no hesitation at ridgelines or dry riverbeds. He simply knew where he was going and moved toward it at a pace that was not quite a run, but was never, ever a walk. We covered the 30 kilometers in just over 5 hours. I ate half a protein bar and drank a liter of water, and then Callum said, "Good warm-up. Shall we get into the drills?" The SAS has a facility at their headquarters in Hereford, England, known informally as the Killing House, a close-quarters battle training complex where the regiment has spent decades perfecting room clearing, hostage rescue, and rapid target discrimination. They brought those lessons with them. What struck me immediately was the economy of motion. In US Special Operations, we train intensively on CQB, close quarters battle, and we are good. But there is sometimes a visual drama to it, a kinetic aggression that can slip into muscle memory theater if you're not careful. The SAS stripped everything down to its bones. Entry clear, move, no wasted steps, no unnecessary shouting, no extra motion. Every trigger pull was preceded by an instant of absolute certainty, and that certainty came not from hesitation, but from a trained eye that had narrowed its world to a single decision loop: threat or no threat, and if threat, exactly where. Callum walked me through their decision-making framework once, leaning against a compound wall during a water break, in that matter-of-fact tone of his that made terrifying competence sound like common sense. "You're not thinking in the room," he said. "You've already thought before you went in. In the room, you're just executing the thinking you already did." It sounds simple. It is not simple. It is the product of years of iterative rehearsal until thinking and doing become one continuous motion. We practiced drills for 6 hours that afternoon. By the end, my team was moving noticeably better. That was both a compliment to the instruction and a sobering reminder that there had been room to improve. The third day was the operational element. an actual patrol into a contested zone where Taliban fighters had been using a series of compounds to cache weapons and pass intelligence between cells. The mission was reconnaissance, eyes on, no engagement unless necessary, collect and report. We moved out at 2200 hours. 2200, on a moonless night, through terrain I had walked in daylight and now could barely recognize. The combined patrol was 8 men, 4 from our ODA, 4 from the SAS element. Callum took point. I will tell you this, watching a trained SAS trooper move at night through unfamiliar terrain with nothing but a map reference, a compass heading, and a set of night vision binoculars is like watching someone speak a language you didn't know existed. He moved through shadow like he was part of it. No hesitation, no noise. The man behind him matched every footfall. The man behind that one matched the one ahead. We moved 12 kilometers to the objective in complete silence. I have done night movements. I have done long ones, difficult ones, through weather and contact and terrain that punished every step. But there was something about the discipline of this movement, the absolute suppression of every unnecessary thing, that put a new frame around everything I thought I knew about operating in the dark. At the objective, we spent 90 minutes in a static observation position, lying flat against a rocky berm, while Callum's signaler transmitted grid references and compound activity back to the operations room. No whispers, hand signals, nothing moved that didn't need to move. Then we pulled back. The extraction route was longer than the infiltration, a deliberate choice to avoid pattern setting. It was also harder ground. By the time we reached the FOB, I had been on my feet for 11 hours, carried a full combat load, and covered over 35 kilometers. That is when Callum turned to me. Right then, again. He was not joking. He was asking in all seriousness whether I wanted to debrief or run the route again, as a training evolution. I looked at him. I looked at the other 3 SAS troopers, who appeared genuinely to be waiting for an answer rather than a reaction. I said I needed an hour. He nodded, fair enough. And I walked away, and I sat behind a HESCO barrier, and I thought about every assumption I had carried into that week about what it meant to be elite. Let me tell you what makes the SAS what it is, because it goes deeper than physical capability. The regiment, as I came to understand it during those days in Kandahar, is built on a philosophy that is almost the opposite of what you might expect. It is not about the loudest, biggest, most aggressive men. The SAS selection course, run twice a year in the Brecon Beacons in South Wales, begins with approximately 200 candidates and ends with perhaps 20 to 30 who earn the right to wear the beige beret. The rest are broken by the cold, by exhaustion, by the mountain itself, or by their own minds. The selection course is legendary for its severity. The fan dance, a grueling march up and over Pen Y Fan, the highest peak of the Brecon Beacons at nearly 2,900 feet, has claimed lives over the years. Men have died from exposure and hypothermia during these marches. The endurance phase requires candidates to cover 40 miles of Welsh mountain terrain, carrying more than 55 pounds of equipment plus a weapon, navigating solo, against the clock, with no encouragement and no feedback from directing staff. That is what every SAS trooper on that patrol had survived before he ever arrived in Afghanistan. But selection doesn't just select for physical toughness. It selects for a very specific kind of mind, one that functions clearly under sustained, compounding pressure, that does not require external validation, and that can navigate ambiguity without panic. The SAS has no time for men who perform bravery. It selects for men who are simply calm by default. The regiment's origins in the Second World War set the template. David Stirling's original SAS believed in the offensive power of small, self-reliant teams, men who could disappear into enemy territory, execute with precision, and vanish before the enemy understood what had happened. That philosophy has never changed. It drove their operations in the Falklands, in Northern Ireland, in Bosnia, in Iraq, and it drove every step of every move I watched them make in Afghanistan. The Green Berets were also born from the Second World War. from the Jedburgh teams that trained European resistance fighters against Nazi occupation, from the OSS operations that destroyed German infrastructure across occupied Europe. We share that bloodline with the SAS. We were built by the same war, shaped by the same understanding that small teams working with local populations can change the outcome of conflicts that conventional armies cannot resolve. But we had taken different paths in the decades since. And those different paths had produced genuinely different men. I spent 3 more days with the SAS element before they moved to a different sector. In that time, I watched them do things I filed away and have thought about almost every day since. I watched Callum debrief a patrol contact, a moment where we had taken fire from a single shooter who then disappeared, and I watched him dismantle every decision our team made, not to criticize but to rebuild. He did it with a precision that was almost surgical. No emotion, no blame, just questions that peeled back each layer of what happened until you could see the root of every choice. Why did you move left instead of right? What was the surface there? Where was the sun at that moment? What did you know, and when did you know it? By the end of the debrief, I understood that moment of contact more completely than I had understood anything I had done in 9 years of military service. And the understanding was uncomfortable because several of the answers to Callum's questions were, I didn't think about that, I just reacted. The SAS had trained the reaction out of themselves. They had replaced it with such a deep layer of thought, so many layers of preconsidered options and pre-built responses, that what looked like instinct from the outside was actually the output of a nearly infinite decision tree that had already been run. That is what years of training at that level produces, not superhuman reflexes, not genetic gifts, thought so deep and practiced so repeatedly that it runs like a background process, invisible and automatic. Here is what I carried home from that week in Kandahar Province in October 2009. The SAS did not humble me by being better at any single thing. No individual skill, shooting, moving, navigating, planning, separated them from the best operators I had ever served alongside. What separated them was the accumulation of everything, running at full capacity, simultaneously, without visible effort. It is one thing to be excellent when fresh. It is another to be excellent after 11 hours on your feet in hostile territory with 65 pounds on your back and the knowledge that someone may be trying to kill you before dawn. The SAS had built themselves, through years of the most demanding selection and training process in the world, to be excellent specifically in that second condition. And I realized, sitting behind that HESCO barrier in the dark, that I had been measuring myself against the first condition and assuming it covered the second. It does not. The Green Berets are extraordinary soldiers. I will defend that statement without reservation. The training we endure, the skills we develop, the missions we execute, all of it is real, and it is hard, and it matters. We changed lives in Afghanistan. We built relationships with local leaders, trained Afghan commandos, provided medical care in villages that had never seen a doctor. That legacy of the Jedburgh teams, of the Second World War operatives who worked alongside the people they were trying to protect, is something the Green Berets carry forward with genuine commitment. But the SAS reminded me that there is always another level, that humility is not weakness, it is the only posture that allows you to keep learning, and that the moment you believe you are the best, you have already begun to slip. I served 2 more tours in Afghanistan after that exchange. I thought about that week differently each time I came back, not because the SAS was always on my mind, but because Callum's question, right then, again, had become a kind of internal standard I held myself to. Could I go again? Was I training hard enough that the answer would be yes? Some days it was. Some days I had to be honest with myself that it wasn't. That honesty, the kind that doesn't require an audience, that happens in the dark, between yourself and your actual capability, is what I believe separates good soldiers from great ones. And it's what I learned in the dust of Kandahar Province from 4 men who wore no rank, introduced themselves by first name only, and moved through the Afghan night like they had been born to it. To the regiment, I still owe you one. To anyone watching this who wears a uniform or is thinking about it, the lesson isn't that you're not good enough. The lesson is that good enough is a ceiling you should never let yourself see. Push through it. Who dares wins.